Okay. Good evening. My name is Annie Kamara, and I'm a reader. John Donne wrote, as you all know, "No man is an island." Well, no book festival is an island either. Because of your encouragement, enthusiasm, and support of so many kinds, I stand here able and privileged to welcome you to our 6th annual book festival. I never tire of this glorious night. This is just to see all of you, hundreds of people, readers gathered to hear words of wisdom and encouragement in this inspiring space. Thank you to Reverend Linda Simmons and the Meeting House members for this beautiful room that they let us have every year. We owe plenty of thanks to our generous sponsors, and especially to Jill and Stephen Karp, Nantucket Island Resorts, Wendy Schmidt, the Nantucket Athenaeum, the Inquirer and Mirror, WCAI, N Magazine, Haft Productions, the Nantucket Community Foundation, the Nantucket Historical Association, and the Dreamland. These generous sponsors make it possible for almost all of our events to be free and open to the public, which is an important goal of ours and has been from our first years. We're a group of volunteers who work all year long to create this event each June. And on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank the indefatigable Maddie Holtram, our executive director, who makes all the pieces come together and inspires us all. To those of you who've been with us since 2012, thank you for your devotion. For those of you for which this is a first time or sometime, thank you for your curiosity and your attention to the written word and the gifts we receive from our writers. Keep coming, and we will meet you here. A significant part of the Nantucket Book Foundation's work is carried out during the school year. Our school teachers and librarians work with one of our founders, Mary Haft, a mighty force unto herself. Please welcome Mary, who will talk to you a little bit about these programs.
It's so great to look out here, and this is our 6th year, and it is a little team of, we are like the little engine that could, so thank you all for being with us. We believe in the power of words, to transport, to inspire, to awaken. Words are powerful engines of change, whether they are spoken, texted, found on a page, or on screens large and small. The power of words allows us to slip from the confines of boundaries and borders and enter a realm in which there is a shared humanity, a shared hope. That power is so clearly revealed in the emergent voices of our island students. Every year, the essays submitted show us depths of imagination and of courage. This year, our competition circled around the question of identity, asking each young writer to examine the identity that was most central to them. Tonight, we honor our winner and our 3 finalists. Our Nantucket Book Foundation programs are growing in purpose and in mission and run throughout the school year. Work that is made possible by a team of teachers and administrators that help to make this work possible all year. And could everyone who is involved in the care and education of our children please stand up and take a bow? Finally, it is my honor and privilege to present 2 individuals who have served as judges for our Young Writer Award since its very beginning. Both are really treasured teachers on this island, have impacted countless students, and even including my own boys when they were little boys here. Jim Salzer is also one of our presenting authors, and Sandy Mitchell. So please give them a warm welcome, and they will introduce our winners.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce to you the author of the winning essay, The Birds and I, Ardell. Congratulations,
Our first finalist, her essay is entitled Being the Daughter of a Single Parent. Lovely essay, Janie Meringer. Our second finalist, a very tender essay, Who Am I, Nishal Khatri.
And our third finalist, Tyler Rothke, for writing Something Bigger. Thank you.
All of our essays, we had, I think, 35 submissions. All of our essays, including our winner and finalists, are available on our website, the nantucketbookfestival.org. Thank you.
Someone texted me this morning just before the start of the festival to congratulate us on making this happen again, and signed off with, "I hope you have a great book feast." And I wanted to share that with you, because it is. Our first speaker this evening is Will Schwalbe, an editor, a journalist, and a reader, a lifelong reader. We love Will because he adheres to the idea that reading is soul-saving and that there are truths to be found in any book, whether it be War and Peace or Captain Underpants. This is Will's second visit to the book festival, the first in 2012, to talk about his best-selling book, The End of Your Life Book Club. His newest book, Books for Living, makes you want to rush to the nearest library and just get a bunch of books. The festival committee was awestruck by Books for Living. It was as if Will had taken all our ideals, all our best passions about the importance of writing, and elevated them to this glorious statement that we hope to say and share at all our festivals. If you're ever stymied for an answer when someone asks you, why are you always reading, or something similar, you'll be able to find a suitable answer on any page of this new book. Please welcome our speaker, Will Schwalbe.
Thank you for that marvelous introduction. Now, as you've just heard, I was lucky enough to be a guest at the first Nantucket Literary Festival. That was in a very different time, and our country had a very different president. Hope was still the operative word. I came to Nantucket with my life partner, David Chang. It was the summer of 2012. 3 years later, David and I, after 31 years of being together, were finally able to marry, and most importantly, to have our marriage recognized across the land just like anybody else's. So you could say that my hopes were fulfilled with the full and enthusiastic support of our president. What's important to remember, though, is that President Obama wasn't always on the side of gay marriage. In fact, there was a time when he was against it. But he listened, he learned, he changed, and he changed my life forever. And one of the main ways Obama learned and continues to learn is he reads. Many have called Obama our reader-in-chief. Obama reads widely, voraciously, and he always finds time to read. He even found time to read when he was in the busiest days of his presidency. When the New York Times asked him why, he said this: "At a time when events move so quickly and so much information is transmitted, reading gave him the ability to occasionally slow down and to get perspective, and the ability to put himself in someone else's shoes. Reading increased his capacity for empathy." Now, I should add, I've been on a 42-city tour, and just about everywhere I go, someone asks me the following question. If you could recommend one book for our current president to read, what would it be? My first answer is easy: the Constitution. But then I go on to answer in a more serious manner, which is to say, basically any book by any writer who is different from him, and that would include every single book written by every single writer who is present at this festival. Now, I believe reading and listening are one and the same. In fact, I'm on a little bit of a crusade. I want to rebrand reading. I want to rebrand it as radical listening. When we read, we're forced to confront what someone else thinks. And for one moment, we just have to be quiet. We can rage against a book, we can scribble things in the margin, we can even throw it across the room, but it doesn't change the words on the page. And that's why I think we need to be readers now more than ever. And I think we all agree we need to read more widely. We need to read books from different people, different cultures, written originally in different languages, representing different experiences and different points of view. But we need to do more than read. We need to act. And to the topic of tonight, we need to cross borders. First, we need to cross the border from the virtual to the real. We need to put down our smartphones and our tablets and introduce ourselves to one another wherever we are. We need to make a point of visiting independent bookstores, libraries, and festivals like this. Second, if a book moves us, we need to do something. We need to cross the border from the reading life to our daily lives. And third, we need to remember that books can help us cross the biggest border there is. It's a border that many people think is impossible to cross. And that's the border between the living and the dead. Let me explain. Now, when I heard I was speaking on the same ticket with Kevin Young and Marie Arena, I freaked out. I think you would too. Clearly, I needed some help. Instantly, I thought of my friend Jean Halberstam. Jean loved reading, she loved Nantucket, and she loved this festival. She also always knew the perfect thing to say. But as many of us know, tragically, Jean is no longer with us. Hard as it is to believe, she and her extraordinary husband, David, have been dead for several years. I longed for her advice, but more than that, I longed for her friendship and for her to be once again present in my life. In fact, I'm filled with longing for people I've loved and lost. Now, logic tells me that I can't get Jean or anyone else I've loved and lost. I can't get their advice on this or anything else. Logic tells me they're forever gone from my life, but logic is wrong. I learned how to contact the dead from an extraordinary woman I met in a bookstore in Atlantic Beach, Florida. I have this habit of asking everyone I know, "What are you reading?" It's the best question I know because it instantly opens minds and helps you cross borders. So when I was in this bookstore in Atlantic Beach, I asked this woman that question, "What are you reading?" And she replied, "Do you have time for a story?" And I said, "Sure." So she told me that she was a fiction reader, but her husband had been a nonfiction reader, biography, current events, history. But she told me that in the last years of her husband's life, he had been terribly sick. And he'd been so sick he couldn't concentrate on books. And he kept starting books, but he was unable to finish them. He'd read a couple pages and put a bookmark in and put it aside. Or he would read all the way, almost to the end of a book, 4 or 5 pages from the end, and he would put a bookmark and he would put it aside. And she told me when her husband died, he left a stack this high of books that he had begun but been unable to finish. And she said to me, "So you asked me what I'm reading?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I'm finishing for my husband all the books that he couldn't finish. He's not here to read, so I'm going to read for him." And that gave me the answer I needed. How do we cross the border between the living and the dead? We can read. I think back about my mother, about whom I wrote the End of Your Life book club. I think of my friend David Baer, who was killed when we were 22 when he was hit by a bus. I think of all the friends, the writers and readers I lost to AIDS. I think of Jean and David Halberstam. What can I do for them? Well, I can read for them. I can read books they loved because in some ways it brings them back. I can read books they might have loved because it engages them with a conversation with me. And I can read books about their lives and legacies to help me continue them. And I can read books to help me live a more meaningful life. Reading can help us cross the river Styx. And reading can help us bring back with us, if only for a minute, not just our friends and loved ones, but also all the writers and readers who have been ferried to the other side. James Baldwin, Plato, Audre Lorde, Lin Yu Tang, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Oscar Wilde, Wallace Stegner, Gloria Naylor. We can bring them back just by opening a book. They have left their advice for us in their books and in their lives. Advice on how to try to mend a world so filled with inequality and injustice. Advice on how to live every day with more meaning and more purpose. They can cross the border between the dead and the living anytime we like, but they can't do it by themselves. It's up to us and not up to them. They only live if we let them live. They live when we read them and remember them. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Our next speaker, Kevin Young, is one of America's most prestigious and admired poets. Among books he has written or edited, he has published 10 books of poetry, the most recent, Blue Laws, Selected and Uncollected Poems, 2005 to 2015. Because I was researching his awards and accolades, the lists I read were very, very long. In 2016 alone, more than 30 critics and other poets hailed him as one of the best or the best poet in America. Blue Laws was named one of the best poetry books of 2016 by the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post. Kevin is a scholar as well. He is currently the curator of poetry at Emory University. I've been corrected. He is the former curator of poetry. He is the director of the New York City Library's Schomburg Center for Research in Black Literature. And this year, The New Yorker has named him their new poetry editor, a magazine that has published his poems for many years. Please welcome Kevin Young.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Good to see you all. This is a New England ode. There is a church very much like this in this poem. New England ode. It's for Richard Newman. New England ode. Straight-backed pews, painted white. Compost, not trash. Boston marriage. Public school or private. Paper, not plastic. Frap, not milkshake or malted. Rotary, not roundabout. Where do you summer? Nantucket, of course. Native, tourist. My loneliness study group meets Thursdays. Shore, coast, overfished. Soda, not pop. Wetlands, not swamp. No Sunday sales. Irish twins. I'm a vegetarian, though I still love lamb. Pulpits high up. Spas, bubblers, dry cleansers, pineapple fences, red tide, sparkling or still. Woodchucks, not groundhogs. My dog and I are both on a diet. Pay at the counter. Do you smell fire? This is our ear. All we need is some good pitching. The Begonia Club. Volvo, 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 Honda, Volvo. The town my great-grandfather founded is just a tiny one. Fans, not AC, Indian pudding, Patriots Day, Bunker Hill Day, Evacuation Day, Lime Ricky. Curse, not pennant, hiss, not boo, pews you unlatch to climb into, then lock shut behind you. Thanks. So it's lovely to be here. I mainly am going to read poems tonight. I'm reading again tomorrow, and I might read a little bit from my new book, which is coming out in the fall. It's called Bunk, and it's very much sort of the opposite of all the hopeful things that Will was talking about. So I don't want to torture you with it tonight. I do want to say it's a real pleasure to read with you all, especially because Will and I were riding down the elevator, and he I hadn't seen him in many years, and we first encountered each other because he was the editor of my first book of poetry 20 years ago. So it's a pleasure to see him again. I thought I would, I'm currently no longer at Emory because I went to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York City. It's part of the New York Public Library. We've been in Harlem 92 years. In the past few months, we've had some nice announcements that I think about a lot of the things that the topic tonight do, from acquiring James Baldwin's archive a few months ago. That was a good week, and a few months since. But I think one of the things that Baldwin does is teach us about each other and about our shared humanity. If you haven't seen the recent film, I Am Not Your Negro, about him and his, I think, place in American culture, which is a prescient, prophetic, powerful, sort of ever-present one. Please go see it. Also read, of course, his books, which are back in people's hands again, I think. Not that they ever left. But I think the way he writes about and talks about what we owe to each other is really powerful and important. It's something that I think we take for granted, and we don't always see in the news or when we wake up. My next book is about the power of lies and the sort of rise of hoaxes and humbug and fake news. I guess it's relevant somehow. But I've been thinking about it for many years. Why are we in this position now? Why are we, it seems every day, having another case of a hoax or a falsehood or something repeated so often that it seems true when we know it's not? So that's very much what I've been thinking about a lot. And poetry, in many ways, is the opposite of that. It really helps us see, because in a poem, there aren't sort of nonfiction and fiction poems. There are these things. And I think there's one thing I try to stress in my book is that there isn't this sort of straight border between, people act like there's this fuzzy border, I should say, between fiction and nonfiction, between true and false. And I think that's not true. I think we very much know, and we might like to play with those things, but it doesn't mean we don't understand the difference. And poetry is one of those places we go to, not that it's more true, but that it talks about it in a way that we don't think about. We think about the stakes as humanity. I love what Lucille Clifton says about poetry, which is that poetry is here to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And that kind of dual role, sometimes in Lucille Clifton's poems, is simultaneous. I'm going to read a few more poems. This one is called Expecting. Expecting. Grave. My wife lies back, hands cross her chest, while the doctor searches early for your heartbeat, peach pit, unripe plum. Pulls out the world's worst boombox, a Mr. Microphone, to broadcast your mother's lifting belly. The whoosh and bellows of mama's body, and beneath it, nothing. Beneath the slow stutter of her heart, nothing. The doctor trying again to find you, fragile fern, snowflake, nothing. After, my wife will say, in fear, impatient, she went beyond her body, this tiny room, into the ether. For now, we spelunk for you one last time, lost canary, miner of coal and chalk, lungs not yet black. I hold my wife's feet to keep her here, and me, trying not to dive starboard to seek you in the dark water. And there it is, faint, an echo, faster and further away than mother's, all beatbox and fuzzy feedback. You were like hearing hip-hop for the first time. Power hijacked from a lamppost, all promise. You couldn't sound better, break dancer, my favorite song bumping from a passing car. You've snuck into the club underage and stayed. Only later, much will your mother begin to believe your drumming in the distance, our Kansas City and Congo Square, this jazz band vamping on inside her. Thanks. Two last poems. This poem is about Phyllis Wheatley, the first African-American poet, writer, published in the United States. She was an enslaved person who came when we think she was probably about 13 or 14 when she came when she was stolen and brought here to the U.S. And she was named after the slave ship that brought her, Phyllis. And I think of her, what it must have meant to write in that situation, to learn English, to learn a new life, and to write. She did many wonderful things, not least of which made it to London to publish her first book. And I think a lot about her, and the first poem I wrote in a sort of what became a long homage to her was about her on that ship, what it must have been like to reverse the Middle Passage and take this trip to London in a different way. She was given there Paradise Lost by the mayor, and this little poem is about that. The poems take their title from her titles, which often are kind of strange and abbreviated to our ears and sound kind of modern as a result. This one's called Elegy on Leaving, blank. Elegy on Leaving. Presented with Paradise Lost in London by the mayor, your first and last triumphant trip there. You read Milton with care, knew his devil not as talk or fast hands, but silence. Your words that no longer arrive. Your husband in debtor's prison to pay off first the house on Queen Street, your envious neighbors. Then on Prince, where your third colic-breathing babe grew cold and passed. Where hours after, you met your Lord, your beloved copy, and you only 31 years old, of Paradise Lost to eat, long sold. Thanks. Thank you. So I have a new poetry book that I've been working on. It'll be out sometime. And I thought I'd read a real short poem from it. The little speck of a thing or idea that was in that second poem is now 10. This is called Whistle. And then he can whistle, this sun, moon of mine circling, the name we gave to the far side of the satellite, this thunder in the near distance, heralding summer, grown thirsty, plummeting down suddenly, drenching the dog and drought-fed lawn. Nothing, for once, is wrong. Cicadas quieted, the rain's metal smell, a train on time arriving, and that sound now his, as if a kiss might make music. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Maria Arana, is a writer and a scholar. Many of us on Island know her as the author of one of our One Book, One Island selections, American Chica, Two Worlds, One Childhood, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. She's the author of 2 novels as well, Cellophane and Lima Nights, and the editor of the much-admired The Writing Life, a collection of essays by prominent writers. Her latest book is Bolivar, American Liberator, which has won the LA Times Book Prize. Marie was the editor-in-chief of Book World at the Washington Post for 15 years, and currently she serves as advisor to the Library of Congress. It is with enormous pleasure I ask you to welcome Marie Arana.
Thank you so much, Annie, and thank you to Mary and to Theron and to Maddie and to all of the people who put this festival together. Isn't it marvelous? Festivals are just extraordinary. I've been involved in the National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. for many, many years, and it's a heck of a lot of work. And there's a heck of a lot of magic involved, and I think some of that magic is certainly felt here, particularly with these 2 splendid authors who have preceded me, marvelous, marvelous writers. So I was thinking about the title of this evening, Open Books, Open Minds, Writing to Cross Borders. And the title, to be very honest with you, takes me back to a little tiny town in a sugar hacienda in Peru when I was a little girl living on the coast between Lima and Trujillo. I had been born in Lima, but when I was 3 months old, my parents moved to this little town. My father was an engineer, built bridges, and he built factories, and he was Peruvian, and my mother was North American. They had met in Boston as students, and they had fallen in love. And my mother was suddenly in this very strange and different culture. And she had to contend with a very large, adoring family of my father's, and they were very, very present in our lives. And she decided that she needed to make me aware that I was a citizen of a wider world, a little beyond that sugar hacienda and a little beyond that coast of Peru, and that there were some cultures out there that I might not see or know if I didn't actually read about them or be read to about them. And she was particularly worried and concerned that I should learn about my North American self, because she told me every day, you may think you're Peruvian, but you're really American. And so she read to me when I was very little, a book called Mighty Men, which actually had a lot of mighty women in it, but for some reason it was called Mighty Men. And it was, from Beowulf to right through Queen Esther and Esther and Queen Sigrid, and all the way to, the modern age. And then she read to me a book called A Child's History of the World. All of this was in English, with the rest of the world around me. She was the only American that I knew. And all the rest of the world around me was in Spanish and very Peruvian. And she was reading to me A Child's History of the World, which began with Ulfa Umfa and Itchy Scratchy, who were the cavemen. And then it went right through history. And very, very different from anything that I was seeing around me. And the world according to Van Loon, which she read to me. And she was reading Kipling and Whitman and Yeats and Keats, and she was a musician. She was not a literary person, but she studied and she decided that she was going to put these before me. These were part of my heritage. Emily Dickinson and Edgar Allan Poe and Mark Twain and all of these. And for good measure, she threw in Greek myths. And of course, there was this fantastic, extraordinary, dynamic God on Mount Olympus who would throw down thunderbolts and ogle the women and come down from time to time and consort with the women. And to hide it from his wife, he would throw a great fog down there. And she would get suspicious and she would go down and he would turn the woman into a cow. And I thought, wow, this is a great culture my mother comes from. So, fast forward a few years, I'm 10 years old, and we moved to the United States. And then my father is the only Peruvian I know, and he is in a sea of English and Americans, and so begins the culture wars for my soul. He starts, when he comes, he goes every few months and every year for sure to Peru. He brings back, he brought back the stories of Ricardo Palma, and he brought back the poetry of Martín Adán, and he brought back the poetry of Gabriela Mistral, and every single one. Of course, by this time I was a teenager and I was reading for myself. And he would bring back Jorge Luis Borges, the great stories of Borges, and then for good measure, he would throw in the Three Musketeers and the Count of Monte Cristo. And I was gobsmacked. It was like, wait. So there is, this is my father's culture. That is on a wedding day, you are arrested and imprisoned, and then you escape in a burlap bag that was meant for a dead body, and you're thrown into the sea, and you swim to an island, and you find a treasure, and you come back as the Count of Monte Cristo. I said, wow, my father comes from a really great culture. It really was, by the way. Dumas was, I think, were the books that made my father, so it was fair to say that these were his culture. So I began to see books as the necessary bridge to my mother's life when I was somewhere very far away, and the necessary bridge to my father's life when he was very far away from his home. And books became for me a way to open my eyes, to open my mind. It was, as Kafka once said, a good book is an axe for the frozen sea inside us. And with every good book that I wrote, I felt a frozen sea had been broken inside me. And I became an addict and an advocate and a cheerleader and a devotee of books. And it strikes me when I think about crossing borders and I think about bridges, of that solitary act of sitting down and writing, which you do entirely alone. It's like being born. Well, born you don't do alone, I suppose. Dying you do alone. Writing you do alone. It is such a solitary act. reading you do alone. And it is such a solitary act. And when you think about these abstract words that you're laying down as a writer, like John Gregory Dunn said, writing books is like laying pipe, and sometimes I think it is. And you are laying this abstract business down all by yourself, from your head to page. And then it is a bridge. It's like a casting rod that you're throwing out into the world and see who comes to it. A book is dead until a reader reads it. So this is the greatest bridge of all. I decided to make my career in books, and as Annie said, I've devoted all my life to them. Editor of books in 2 publishing houses, the literary editor of the Washington Post, and then I decided to really close the circle and write these books myself. And in the process of writing myself, I went jumping from one category to another, giving my agent, my editor, big headaches because, I went from memoir to epic sort of novel set in the jungle, and then I went to a tiny little love story set in the urban area of Lima, and then to write a history. In all of these books, I was trying to capture something about the character of the Latin American people, trying to be a bridge to my North American career for Latin America. And so in thinking about these things, and in thinking about what is it that we do when we write history and we write facts and we write fiction, and they're very, very distinct. But in the process, I began to think about that tiny space in our brains, maybe even millimeters, that separate the cells that allow us to remember from the cells that allow us to dream. And I'm no scientist, but I see it as this minimal, tiny little corridor between, so sort of an infinitesimal jump between your cortex and I think it's the hippocampus, and it's right there in that tiny little spot that it is decided. You decide, and your brain factors what is fact and what is fiction, between what is remembered and the imagination. And it is there in that little itsy-bitsy place, which I don't think our President Trump can recognize, that our thoughts wander from the rigorously factual to the flamboyantly imagined. So this, to me, is the most magical bridge of all, that narrow space between the vast storehouse of your gray matter, where writing gets done. So you leap from that one little lobe that remembers to another little lobe that fantasizes, a lobe that turns whatever you've experienced and whatever has been factual in your life into either fact if you're writing nonfiction in a narrative way, or into fiction or into poetry. And you pull out of that chaos a neat, tidy arc that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And pretty soon, you are devising a construction that pulls the mind past the disorder of our lives and our experience. And you're giving it organization, you're lending it universality and traction. And you do this so that you can create a story that will have relevance, that will gain empathy, that will mean something to everyone so that it sings. And that is an extraordinary bridge building exercise from my point of view. And I think that in traveling, if you're talking about crossing borders and you're talking about traveling bridges, writers do it, readers do it. As Jorge Luis Borges once said, I've always imagined that paradise will be a very large room full of books. And I would like to edit that and say, right now, I think that paradise is a very large room full of people who love books. That's you. Thank you very much.
That was a great ending. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much. I told these authors that our audiences are very generous, and you always are. Thank you so much. And go on and have a great book feast. Thank you.